signed up for her course twice online, paid for it, but never did a single thing, and then withdrew. So my son, William, has traumatized her. Now, I really laughed when I saw your bracelet. I actually missed the first announcement you made. I have no idea what you said, because the whole time I was staring at your wrist. I would definitely wear that. Okay, we all have battle scars. Look at your neighbor and say, I know you have battle scars. I can see that. Way too often, we look around a room and we say, this is what I think, we look around a room and we think, well, I know everybody has tough times, but mine in particular is probably different from everybody else's, right? No. So much harder than everybody else's. That's what I used to think. One time, does anybody know Carol Kent? Raise your hand if you do. I've read all of her books. She's like my biggest hero. I just love her to death. I went to one of her conferences, and I was in a really bad place that weekend. It was a 3-day conference. It was 2 evenings and an entire Saturday. And night 2, I sat there feeling so sorry for myself that I could not even hear what they were saying. And the things that I was saying in my head were, well, of course she can do what she's doing. I mean, she's gorgeous and she's skinny and she's got 3 sisters who go wherever, and she can write books and she probably writes them effortlessly. And she has no problems. Like, surely, if she had my issues, she couldn't be doing what she's doing. So on the last break, I walked up to her table and I was looking to see if she had any new books, because like I said, I had already read everything she'd written. And there was just this little brochure about an upcoming book. I picked it up, and I'm really glad I carried it back to the table, because I cried ugly cry. Her story that she had not even been sharing with anybody was that her son had murdered someone, her only son, and he was going to spend his life in prison. And she was not talking about it yet. It was too raw. It was an open wound. And I just thought, you know what? My life is so good right now. Like, still to me, that seems like almost unsurmountable odds. Of course, she certainly has. She's written several books about it, and they have a ministry in prison, and this God's story goes on, no matter what happens. But it is really important that we look at ourselves and take the time to heal and understand that we are worth it. Each one of you are incredibly valuable. Taking the time to heal is important. I am fairly stubborn, because about 3 years later, I just found this in my notes when I was going back looking at some Bible study notes. And about 3 years after that event, I had written down in my notes the names of 3 people who had no problems. See how I'm a little obsessed with this thing? Still had not learned my lesson. Have you ever been there? Just don't even know how he's so patient with us. I had written down in my notes 3 people whose lives were perfect. And I knew these people well. It wasn't like I didn't know them. I knew them well, and their lives were perfect, And then I had made notes throughout that. The first couple, within a year, was divorced. The second couple, within a year, had dealt with an extramarital affair. And the third person was in my car one evening, burst into tears, and said, I am so miserable in my marriage, I can't even go forward. Now, while I do take from that I'm ridiculously stubborn, I also think God is very, very good at, do you think he knows us? He knew the issues that I had with looking at myself every once in a while and going, well, my stuff is overwhelming, other people's must be okay. That's why he directed me to those 3 people. because he knew what was coming. He knew what they were going to be walking through, and he was reminding me that everybody goes through tough times. So I want you to open your program here, and you have a space where you can take notes. Find that page where it says notes. And I want you to take a couple minutes here and write down the battles you have fought. Whether they are open, whether you have healed, whether they are old scars and they are way behind you, write down the tough stuff you have been through.
Not long enough. That was depressing.
So as I'm talking, if you think of more stuff that you have been through, just keep writing. Make a record. We're going to continue with this exercise throughout. So I really went back and forth on whether or not to share my story, because sometimes when you share your story a lot, you kind of start to think, well, everybody knows that. I mean, literally. I feel like everybody in the world probably knows that story by now, just because I have shared it a lot. And so I decided that I was going to share it anyway, and so for those of you who have heard plenty about my life already, just write something else. Think about what Monique said, or any of that. So I was born in 1970 in Holmes County in an Amish family. My parents left the Amish right before I was born. My dad wanted to buy a car because he had lost his job and couldn't find a job without a car. And so that was how they made the decision. He went and bought a car. He came home and he told my mom, we need to go to church somewhere else. I just bought a car. Very spiritual decision, too. They joined a very conservative Mennonite church, and but the culture in my household was definitely an Amish family culture. I didn't really understand that until much later in life, that my family was Amish even though we had left, because the culture is very unique. My mom and dad both came from families that had lots of open wounds as compared to having battle scars. I was the youngest of 5 kids, and my mother frequently said that she wished she only had 2. This definitely left me feeling unwanted. I was number 5. Another phrase she frequently said was, "Why can't you be more like your sister?" My sister was very quiet, very well behaved. Shockingly, I was not. So there was that issue. I just really wanted to be somebody else. And when you really want to be somebody else, that's a problem. That does not lead to a healthy life. And if this is heavy for any of you, I want you to know that I've had lots of counseling. I'm okay. These are all healed wounds. But sometimes when people mention stuff like this, it can feel really heavy. So just remind yourself, she's okay. She's had lots of counseling. At the age of 3, I was sexually assaulted for the first time. And throughout my life, there was 12 different people that assaulted me, so it became the overwhelming theme in my life. The last time was when I was 21 years old. And so from 3 to 21, I had a very skewed sense of self and sense of being safe, no safety. Just felt completely open and vulnerable to anyone. Okay, let me go back to my notes. My mother had an undiagnosed mental illness, and my father was an alcoholic, and they truly increased each other's misery. As one would get worse, as the alcoholism got worse, my mother's mental illness got worse, and then he would drink more, and it was just, throughout the years of my childhood, it just kept getting worse and worse. At the age of 12, I wanted to go to Highland High School to go to middle school. And I begged my mother to let me go there to middle school because I wanted to go to high school. Now, in our culture, that was completely unnecessary. Why would a girl go to high school to be a mom? That doesn't make any sense. And beyond 8 years is useless. And 8 years of school. And besides, when you finish middle school, you go to work full time. That is what you do. When that time came around, I got a full-time job. And several months after that, I still truly cannot understand how this happened, but someone, I don't remember it happening, but someone gave me the family checkbook. And at 14, I became responsible to pay the bills at my house. And I didn't make enough money to do it. And so I was deciding whether to pay the electric bill or the mortgage or the gas bill or to buy fuel for my car to get to work at 14. The other thing that happened in that process is I became in charge of the household because I was the only one paying bills. So you can guess how that went. That did not go well. Our relationship, very fragile relationship that I had with my mother, completely deteriorated from that. I had zero respect for her. I get so off topic, it's unreal. I can barely find my way back sometimes, so you guys are gonna get to show me grace. Isn't that great? A few weeks before I turned 18, I packed up my clothes and I moved out. 2 months after that, they sold the house and they got a divorce. Which I will say, at the time in our community, people I know, my parents were the second people to ever get divorced. And so I would read, I was always reading, I was always trying to learn. I would read that they would say that it's not ever the children's fault when the parents get a divorce, okay? We've all heard that, right? But I would say, but it actually is, because I left. If I hadn't left, they wouldn't have sold the house and they wouldn't have gotten divorced. So now I was carrying that. So unhealthy. I can't even explain to you how unhealthy I was. When I was 18, I started to date a 15-year-old, and it was the younger brother of my best friend at the time. Now, I will tell you, that's not the best way to meet somebody. She was not thrilled, because I was a wild child, and her brother was sweet and innocent and 15, and I was not. But we have gotten the last laugh, 30 years later, still together. He's a very patient man, I will tell you that. Although I know that we had good times at the beginning of our marriage and while we were dating, I don't remember a lot of it because I was so busy trying to kill the pain. And so I was drinking a lot. I was cutting, I was doing drugs, I was overworking, working as much as I possibly could, You know, if you're exhausted, then you can sleep. So, I mean, I do know that we had good times, but I don't really remember them. I definitely feel like my life started over at 30. I got a fresh start at 30. And that was when I went to counseling for the first time. And that's been 18 years. So if you're doing the math, that makes me 28. Every time. When you do the math about how old I am, that makes me 28. That's the age I've decided to stay. When we look back on our lives, sometimes we think we want to change some of it. I don't know, do you agree with me? You go back and you think, oh, I've made so many mistakes. Other people have made so many mistakes. There's just been so much pain. If we could just do things differently. What I've really tried to do in my life is to say, okay, I'm going to be grateful for this. I'm going to be thankful for this. So I will tell you today that if I could go back and I could snap my fingers and change every time I was sexually assaulted, I wouldn't change any of them. And the only reason I wouldn't change them for me is because it's made me who I am. And I like me. But I definitely didn't always like me. So we're going to talk today about how do we get to that? How do we get to that point where we can say, you know, I got divorced, and I hate that I got divorced, but I like who I am because of it. It's made me a better person. I've made good choices. I've built good friendships since then, and I like who I am now. Therefore, I can be happy about this open wound, about this scar, whichever way it is, whether it's open or closed. We can begin to be grateful for the things that have occurred because they make us who we are. Listen to this. I'm going to give you the website that any of these quotes come from afterwards, so you don't have to write them down. But I thought this was so profound. I believe the wisest, most loving, and well-rounded people you have ever met are likely those who have known misery, defeat, and heartbreak, either from losing someone or something they loved, and they have found their way out of the depths of their own despair. These people have experienced many ups and downs and have gained an appreciation, a sensitivity, and an understanding of life that fills them with compassion, understanding, and deep, loving wisdom. People like this were not born, they develop slowly over the course of time. So someone who is in the audience gave me a gift, a really funny gift right before I came up here to speak. I won't look at you, so in case you don't want them to know. I used to have a neighbor when I was, very shortly after we got married, I would say. And we weren't close, but we saw each other every once in a while. And then years later, this person came to New Point as a mentee, and I came bouncing out of the back, and she said, "You were like glowing." And I thought, this is not the smoking, drinking trailer person that I used to live right beside. We both lived in trailers, that's why I'm saying that. I miss that house still today. It was beautiful, it was amazing. I don't miss the smoking and the drinking, I'll miss it. She said, and here you were, she said, you were glowing. And now you've continued to grow past that. We are not who we once were, but we still have a long way to go, right? You are not the smoking, drinking, trailer person I used to be.